Stories that are untold, underreported, and all-out inspirational. Carey Pena reports.
Hey guys, I'm Carey Pena. Thank you so much for listening to Carey Pena Reports on iTunes and Stitcher, and for watching our shows on Facebook and YouTube. You can always find us at Inspired Media 360, and of course, you can always find us online at inspiredmedia360.com. Today, we are sharing the story of a man who sacrificed his life in the name of journalism. David Gilkey was killed on June 5th, 2016. His story is both heartbreaking and very inspirational. Joining us in studio today, Rick McCartney, one of David's closest friends. Rick, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Carey.
I know it's been an emotional journey since the loss of your friend, and I really appreciate you agreeing to come in and talk about this. People may not recognize David's name, but in the world of journalism, he was a rock star.
He was, and it's funny because knowing him since our senior year in high school, I have to say, I didn't know what a rock star he was until he passed away. When he was killed in Afghanistan, obviously that was very sad for all of us, his family and friends. It was just horrifying because he had been in harm's way his entire career. And for that to suddenly happen, it was a shocker. I mean, it was. But then going to memorial services and speaking at various things and talking about David, getting a really strong sense of his career and what he had been about and the number of awards that he had won. It was just amazing that this was my high school friend. We'd stayed in touch our entire lives. Very close friends. He was a good guy. He was like a second father to my son. And we had a lot of great fun together. So it was very hard. But then hearing about him as a professional like that was wonderful.
Well, he was incredible at what he did, but he didn't find the need or feel the need to talk about himself. He was very humble. And when I asked you in an email prior to our interview to describe him, you started it by saying he is a truly authentic man. Mm-hmm. Tell me about him.
He truly authentic and had no hair. I just wanted to say that. I know his parents would love that. But yeah, he was very authentic. I mean, he was who he said he was. And when he went into, these war zones to take pictures, he did it with the idea that I needed to show the world what was happening. There were reporters that would be with him. As a photojournalist, certainly he would see through his eye what he wanted to expose. He also would get direction. He worked as the chief photographer at NPR, based out of Washington, D.C., and, of course, put him in the middle of everything that was going on. I mean, there were certainly assignments here in America, but, we know what to do here. Riots and things like that can be scary on the streets here in America, but nothing like what's happening in Afghanistan and Iraq. And since 9/11, he was sent over there. He was one of the first photojournalists to go into that war.
He went many times, and he was in Iraq, he was in Afghanistan. I was reading his resume, and it is truly incredible, his body of work.
Yeah.
Did he always love photojournalism? You said in the email that he was like on the yearbook committee.
Yeah.
And
he always did. His father was an avid photographer and is really a fantastic photographer. And as kids, we would go to his house. They had a dark room in the basement. We would always get in a lot of trouble for going in there, but David always wanted to show me what his father was doing in there. Or his father would ask us to come in and show us, very specifically what it was all about. And David just grabbed on. He just loved it and had such an eye for it. There's some very early pictures in high school and even some when he was younger than high school that really demonstrated that he had an eye. How to shoot something and tell the whole story. It's not an easy thing to do.
It is not an easy thing to do. And I think that goes to the fact that his authentic nature, because being a great storyteller and being a great photographer, you have to tell the authentic nature of the story.
That's very well put. You're right. And I do think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, especially these days, we talk about what we see on the news and the fact that there are, slots 24/7 for us to fill content. So it becomes less and less authentic. I know there's some great organizations that are still doing amazing news, and NPR is certainly one of them. And going out into the field and into harm's way, or just telling stories, in our backyard, to be that authentic, to have that personality where it's not, I'm trying to get something across. It's more, I'm trying to demonstrate what's going on here. And people can look at my photography and they can say, they can have their own interpretation of what's happening. And he was very good at that. It's the reason he was in that position.
I always admire people who do what they truly love in life. And he was doing that.
He was. And we went to Oregon State University together our first year of college because I think neither of us were really ready to go to college. And so we decided we were going to do that together. We did. We joined a fraternity together, had a great time, but he was always shooting. He was always taking great pictures. It was more than a hobby at that point. And he left Oregon State University. I went off to New York after the first year to NYU, and he had gone to Boulder, where he went to school there for a little bit and then began working very quickly with the Daily Camera right there in Boulder. And that's a very well-known publication.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a good place to start. And that's where he started. Immediately after that, he was there for a few years. I almost kind of look at David in decades now because he died when he was 50. And so we're also working on putting together a book of his work. And so I've been thinking about all these different decades, what he did when. So immediately after he was in Boulder, he went out to Detroit to work for the Free Press there, which is known as one of the top.
June 5th, 2016, David was on his way to an assignment for NPR in Afghanistan. They were embedded with the Afghan army, and that proved to be a disaster. It is alleged that someone tipped off assassins who ambushed them and bombed the Humvee. Tell me when you got this news.
I actually got it the next day because of the time difference. And I was on Facebook, and I saw a picture of David, and I kind of scrolled through it. And then I scrolled back because I thought, well, that's kind of an odd picture to see on Facebook. David would never post a picture of himself like that on Facebook. So I scrolled back and I read the headline, and it was shocking to me. So I called his girlfriend, who is also a very good friend of mine my entire life, and her son answered the phone. She couldn't even answer the phone, and I could hear her in the background, so I knew what it meant, and I knew that it was true. I don't remember who that particular report was, but reports were coming out very quickly. And then, of course, it was, investigate what's happening. Knowing that David was gone and his translator were also killed. They were both killed. There were a few other people that made it through that. And it was just a very scary time, obviously. I mean, being embedded with the Afghan army was something that was of great caution to all journalists. It wasn't the same, still isn't, I would say, based on what I've learned in this last year, because I had not been that involved in safety for reporters and, really being focused on what it is that these journalists are going through when they're in the field, and what the different protocols and what the really true understanding by way of editors and people who are creating these assignments as to the safety of where they're going. So in this year, I have learned quite a bit about that. So
You've mobilized on behalf of your friend.
I have, and his family has, and that is his legacy, is that this does not happen again. And it's not, big cause. It's there are people going out there to get the news, to tell the stories, and we have to make sure they're safe, because there are unsafe places in the world. Right now we think of the Middle East. In 5 years from now, it could be parts of America. You just don't know. So the reality is these journalists, they need information. They need intelligence. They need to know. And in the days when the U.S. Army was carrying a lot of these journalists, that was part of it. I mean, we're at war, sure, and there are priorities at war. But needless to say, we need to get the story out. We need to tell the truth. We need to be that true, even though it's war. And so in the days when the U.S. Army was protecting a lot of these journalists, it was much safer. I would say there were securities that could be relied upon. And as we needed to start working with other security personnel, it got a little less safe.
Yeah, because we don't know who's on our side.
That's true. And of course, that's always going to be a concern. And NPR and a lot of the people that work there, of course, are focused on a lot of those things. I mean, everybody knows these things. But what we've learned over this year, and by way of investigating David's death and what happened that day, and the people who, killed him, is that there are so many aspects to this safety question. There are assignments. I mean, you and I are in journalism, and we know that when we make an assignment, I mean, obviously here we're not really focused on what the securities and the safeties are, but we do need to know the whole story, get a real good sense of it before we put somebody in it so that they can find the truth and so on. But when you're talking about physical harm and things like that, you've got to know much more.
Did you find anything out over the last year about exactly what it was that happened? Did one of the members of the Afghan army turn on them?
I don't really want to talk about the particular report. I mean, there have been investigations. The FBI has been involved, of course, the military. There was very swift action, and there were some people that my understanding is that they were also killed because of what they had done. I don't have the details on that, so I wouldn't speak to that directly, but people can look that up. You know, that's what's going to happen in these cases.
Rick, how did you process the loss of your friend? This was your buddy for a very long time and someone who you loved.
Yeah. It's funny because he is the first and only person that I've been very close to, other than maybe a grandparent that's passed away. When my father passed away, we had several years before we knew it was going to happen. So this was very sudden. So there are those shocks and those things that you think about. It was so important for me to try to remember him. And fortunately, I mean, one of the greatest things that happened through all of this is going back only a month and a half before he died, he was here in Phoenix, staying with my son and I at the house for a full week. And I had said to David at the time, I said, you just seem like you're the happiest I've ever seen you. He seemed so contented. And all of the reports, as soon as we found out, there were memorial services that were put together through NPR and through Claudine Kent, who was his girlfriend. And they had put together a memorial service at the museum in Washington, D.C. And his parents had asked me to speak. And obviously I was flattered. So I had the opportunity to write a speech. And I loved it. I loved it. I told incredible stories about our life together. I told stories that probably shouldn't have been told because maybe I'd be out of there.
Those are the best kind of speeches.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was just a wonderful experience writing it, but I was so upset. I was so hurt by the whole thing. Until his mother got up just before me and spoke. And his mom, David Gilkey, is just a wonderful woman. She really is. Talk about authentic. And she has this way of just making you feel really good. And she got up there and she spoke about him from the standpoint of he died loving what he was doing. He was always this person that was out there for adventure. He was always going to go into harm's way. He was always going to do that. And he died doing that. And there were just a lot of things that she had said that morning that just made me feel like, okay, you know, which, you know, so you process that. But the other great thing is learning about his incredible career, the incredible awards and things that he won because of his talents.
That he never talked about.
That he never talked about. I mean, there were some of them that I didn't even know about. You'd go to his house and you'd see Emmys. He got the Edward R. Murrow Award for photojournalism. I mean, that's the top. The Robert F. Kennedy. I mean, he had these amazing awards. He never talked about him. You'd go into his house and you'd see these statues and things. You just think, well, he's a great art collector.
You know, I thought it was important to do this show for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to tell his story. Sure. He was a truth seeker.
Me too.
And an incredible journalist. And he deserves to be remembered. Mm-hmm. I also think it is important to talk about how journalism is under attack. This is not a political discussion. It's not a political show. But the fact of the matter is that men and women all over the world are doing incredible journalism, and they are putting their lives at risk to do so. Prior to the show, I texted a couple of friends of mine who I really respect. One of them is Morgan Lowe. He's a journalist in town. He works for CBS 5. And he wrote me saying, quote, journalism is under attack and under fire all over the globe. Earlier this week, respected reporter Javier Valdez was gunned down in Sinaloa. Here in the United States, we learned that the president had asked the director of the FBI to start prosecuting journalists for published leaks. Journalists are also under fire from an increasingly angry populace. There is more good journalism being practiced and available today than ever before. Technology is delivering it, but something else is causing this. Journalism is a product of the environment. It grows where there is suppression.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there have always been throughout history stories of people trying to tell other stories and being affected by it one way or another. You talk about being in harm's way. I mean, you can tell a story and put yourself in harm's way just by virtue of telling the story. So I think he's absolutely right about that. And that's one of the reasons why we think that David's legacy in all of this is about safety and security, protocols so that journalism and stories can be told. I mean, obviously going into a war is very different than putting something on the front page of the Arizona Republic. But the stories need to be told. The power of that is what America is all about. And frankly, given the fact that we're disseminating content all over the world, it's what other countries are becoming about. I mean, people want to hear the story. It makes us better. It improves our existence. There are just a lot of reasons why we have to protect that.
And you recently were in Washington, D.C. Just tell us quickly what that trip was all about.
Yeah, Reporters Without Borders, which is an incredible organization based out of Paris, is focused on the safety and security and obviously advocacy for reporters and freelance journalists. And so we were asked by the French consulate to come to an event and demonstrate or show David's work, and then also speak about safety and security. And it's helped me get very involved as a representative of David's family. I'm certain that we'll be able to work very hard with NPR and other partners. There's a group called ACOS, ACOS Alliance, which is trying to create protocols for freelance journalists for their safety and security. Reporters Without Borders is doing incredible things, and we believe that's David's legacy, is to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. His story needs to be told, certainly. I know David would never want it to be about him. Every single time we get together and we do a speech or we speak about David, we always laugh and say, he would hate this. And I always laugh and say, yeah, but he'd secretly love it because he was very talented.
For those listening and watching, how do you want him to be remembered?
For me personally, I want him to be remembered as the incredible friend that he is, and he will be. That will never go away. But for the public, as a very talented photojournalist who really wanted to tell the story authentically, and I hope that bleeds into everybody else that's telling stories, so they're doing that as well. There's a lot of junk out there.
As I mentioned off the top, it is a heartbreaking story, a life cut short far too soon.
Coming up in just a few days is his year anniversary.
But at the same time, I think his story is one of great inspiration. And I thank you so much for sitting down with us today and sharing it.
We appreciate the exposure. Thank you so much, Carey.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm Carey Pena. You can follow along with all of our interviews at inspiredmedia360.com, and be sure to connect with us on Facebook. Today's show produced and engineered by Shannon Hernandez, brought to you by Inspired Media 360. Until next time, stay inspired.